Hello, everyone. It is a rainy Memorial Day on my little island, so I thought just the right time to pick up the thread of our story about a little girl on another island, this one a faraway island, who is a rather mischievous little person. So let's see what type of mischief she's going to get into in the next chapter. In the previous chapter that we read, our main character, Inga Maria, had spent her first day on her grandmother's farm on the island of Bornholm, and she has met all the animals. And she has also received the delivery of her trunk from Copenhagen and unpacked what she can in her grandmother's little house. And one of the main things she's taken out of the trunk is her volume of Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales, which cheers her up but also makes her sad because it reminds her of her mother. So now we're on to chapter 3, The Pig and the Prunes. By the end of the next day, I have learned how to muck out the stables, sweep and scrub the kitchen floor, build a fire in the hearth, make a bed, and pluck and stuff a chicken. I am not used to so much hard work. Mom and I had 2 servants to help in our apartment in Copenhagen. I am exhausted, and grandmother is very pleased by this. Idle hands make sport for the devil, she says. I think she means that if you are exhausted from working hard all day, there is no energy left for being naughty. It's not true, though. I still manage to be a bad girl and make grandmother grumble like an ogre. She is not pleased when I feed Plenty the prune tart that is meant for our supper, even though Plenty had grunted and snuffled politely around my skirt, begging for food. It can't be easy looking after 14 babies on nothing more than skimmed milk and slops. Grandmother is even less pleased when the prunes upset Plenty's tummy. She drags me back out to the barn, points at the brown poo dripping from the wall, and shouts, "How's that for Plenty?" I try not to laugh, but I can't help it. Grandmother has made a joke, even if she doesn't know it. I get my second slap. This time, it is across the leg. I have 3 pairs of stockings on, so it doesn't hurt my skin, but it still hurts my feelings. After supper, I think that I will cheer grandmother up by reading her a story. She sits in her rocking chair by the fire, knitting balls of bright red wool. I sit at her feet. "That's pretty," I say, pointing to the blob she is knitting. This seems to make her glad. She doesn't smile, but nods, knits a little faster, and rocks back and forth so that her feet lift from the floor. I open Hans Christian Andersen and read carefully down the list of stories. I choose The Princess and the Pea and read in my very best storytelling voice. It is about a prince who wants to be certain that he is marrying a real princess. His mother, the queen, places a pea under 20 mattresses and 20 feather quilts and says that if the girl is truly a princess, she will be able to feel the pea when she sleeps on top. I notice halfway through reading the story that grandmother has stopped knitting. When the girl says she is black and blue all over and has barely slept a wink all night, grandmother actually leans forward and nods. She is excited at the discovery that the girl is a real princess. When I finish reading the fairy tale, I show grandmother the beautiful colored picture in my book. The princess is trying to sleep on top of a mountain of purple, pink, blue, red, and gold mattresses, looking terribly uncomfortable, but ever so pretty. Grandmother leans back in her chair and starts to knit again. She says, "A shameless waste of good food, if you ask me. Peas are for eating, not stuffing beneath mattresses." The next day is Thursday. Visiting day, grandmother calls it. She makes me wash with extra care before I dress and even makes sure the last bits of donkey poo are removed from my ear holes. When we are putting on our coats and scarves, grandmother surprises me by pulling a red woolen hat down on my head. I run to the small mirror by the door and laugh at the thick floppy folds topped by the biggest pom-pom I have ever seen. This is the blob that grandmother was knitting late into the night. "Grandmother, it's magnificent," I cry and throw myself at her. I am grateful for the amazing hat, but most of all, I am grateful that my grandmother wanted to knit it for me. I bury my head in her chest and mumble, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Grandmother peels me off and grumbles, "Don't fuss now, it's only a hat. Goodness knows we needed something to cover that bald head of yours." She frowns, but we both know that I have 2 bonnets and a white woolen hat in my trunk out in the barn. Any one of them would hide the tufts of hair just as well, but none are as bright and cheerful as my pom-pom hat. We walk along the muddy lanes side by side. At least, grandmother walks. I slip and hobble and clump in my wooden clogs. I am not used to the wide open spaces of Bornholm. There are green hills rolling over the top of one another as far as I can see. The meadows are dotted with clusters of winter bare trees and the occasional farmhouse and barn. There is not a soul to be seen, and the air is heavy with silence. In Copenhagen, there would be the rumbling of carriage wheels, the clip-clop of horses' hooves, the cries of market boys, and the chitter-chatter of people meeting in the streets. I cannot help myself. I need to bring my own chitter-chatter to the island air. "Grandmother," I say, "do you think a carrot would work as well as a pea?" "Heaven help us," she cries. "What are you prattling on about, child?" "For the princess test," I explain. "I wonder if it has to be a pea under all those mattresses, or if any old vegetable would do. A carrot, perhaps, or a bean. Maybe even a turnip." She sighs. "A turnip would be far too big and too easy to peel." I smile, glad that she is joining in on the fun. "What about a small potato?" I ask. "No, a potato would still be too large," she snaps. "How about fruit?" I suggest. "An apple or a pear?" Too big," she says. "Well," I challenge her, "what about something small, like a berry? A strawberry or a blackberry or a gooseberry?" I laugh because gooseberry is such a funny word. She stops walking and looks thoughtful. "No, even a berry is bigger than a pea. I really think it has to be a pea. Anything else would be too silly." She starts walking again. "And wasteful," I add helpfully. She looks straight ahead and does not answer, but I swear on my papa's watery grave, I see a smile twitch around the edge of her mouth. I am too happy to talk for the rest of the journey. Besides, the mud seems to get deeper the farther we go, and I put all my energy into dragging one clog in front of the other. By the time we reach the house of grandmother's friend, I am cold, exhausted, and starving. Angelina Nordstrup is tall and so incredibly thin that any hopes of a generous morning tea are dashed to pieces the moment she opens the door. Her piercing stare slips down her long nose, lands on my head, then slides all the way to my toes. She turns down the corners of her mouth and sniffs loudly. I take my muddy clogs off and sit them to one side of the doorstep, but her disapproval still hangs in the air like a chilly fog. "Good day and God bless you, Dizzy Brulin," she says, without sounding like she means a word of it. She does not greet me. I wonder why she is calling grandmother Dizzy Brulin. I know for a fact that her name is Astrid, not Dizzy. I open my mouth to explain, but grandmother pokes me in the back. Once we are in Angelina's kitchen, I reach up to remove my hat and grandmother pokes me in the back again. At this rate, I will have a hole right through my body by the time we leave. Angelina moves slowly and carefully around her little kitchen while grandmother and I sit in silence at the table. She places teacups, plates, a tiny jug of milk, and a delicious-looking ginger cake before us. She pours tea, then cuts us each a slice of cake so thin that I can see the light through it as she passes mine to my plate. Even so, I know what good manners are and am eager to make my grandmother proud. I smile and say, "Thank you, Angelina, for this bountiful cake." I don't know how anyone can cut cake so finely without its disappearing into thin air, but I don't suppose grandmother will mind the dishonesty just this once. Then, spotting the china teapot covered in a pattern of violets, I lean forward and say, "Good day, pretty teapot, and thank you for pouring my tea so beautifully." Angelina Nordstrup is staring at me as though I have just told her I was born under a toadstool and lived off slugs and worms for the first 10 years of my life. Grandmother is rolling her eyes like Levi again, but no one calls me a barbarian. I pick up my cake carefully so that I don't tear the paper-thin slice, and it is gone in a flash. I long for more, but no matter how hungrily I stare at the cake left in the middle of the table, I am not offered another piece. Grandmother and Angelina talk quietly about their hens, the weather, and the price of flour. There are so many silent bits in their conversation that I wonder why Grandmother has bothered to visit. There is no news about friends and family, no sharing of stories or discussion about books, no noisy games of cards or drafts, and definitely no laughter. This is the most boring morning of my life, and that includes the first morning on the boat from Copenhagen when the captain made me sit on a barrel full of eels and threatened to throw me overboard if I made a sound or moved an inch. By the time we leave, my bottom and legs have pins and needles from sitting still for so long, and I am not sure whether I can walk home with such an empty stomach. We are just around the corner of Angelina's stone fence when Grandmother pulls a parcel from her pocket. She unwraps the brown paper and hands me a thick wedge of cheese and an apple. I immediately forgive her for not making Angelina give me more cake. I smile at her, shout, "Thank you, Grandmother, for this beautiful cheese and apple," and gobble greedily.